All right. This is basically my take on like the relationship between market power slash monopoly power and information goods. I'll do it kind of quickly since you have a lot of context. All right, so just vocabulary. What are we talking about? Information goods. What I mean by that is basically things that can be copied without cost. So texts, ideas, not necessarily just things that are like IP protected, but like anything informational that can be copied at zero cost, which, as you understand, is like much of the value produced in our economy. It's stuff that needs to be invested in, like everything else. All right.
Yeah. All the services side, all of the IP side, all of that. It's like everything that's not like a hard physical manufactured, or I guess there's some aspect of the care economy that might not be captured in that as well, like human to human interaction.
Um, yeah, exactly, exactly. What I'm talking about is things that can really be copied.
Yeah.
Um, we have this idea that like that these things are supported by markets, that we have like markets for information that are supporting and the production of information goods. I think this is really a misleading idea. This is real. There's like a really pretty deep fallacy or confusion in the idea of markets for information.
Hmm.
The reason for this is if you think about a market, if you think about what's going on in a market. If it's operating competitively and efficiently, what goes on in a market is the price of goods gets driven down to the marginal cost of producing the next copy of the good. So if you've got a good market for like cabbages, then the price of cabbages goes down to like exactly the cost with no fat in it of producing the next head of cabbage. And so if
Sure.
so like if you picture a market, like basically people are mostly selling like physical goods. You
Yeah.
don't
There has to be something on the one side because in this case it's zero, in which you can't,
exactly,
markets
exactly.
don't operate with zeros in them.
Markets don't perfectly put, right? Markets don't operate with zeros in them, and the marginal cost of producing another copy of a piece of information is zero. So you don't see like info stands in markets, right? Because just doesn't you can't trade it.
Yeah, it makes me think of how like infinite that's true on both extremes, right? If it's infinite value or if it's zero value, then the market doesn't work. And the problem with the infinite side, of course, is in this world of software, everybody's claiming that they're going to make a billion copies or $1 trillion or whatever, which isn't helpful from a market perspective either.
Right. Um, Nonetheless, as you know, sometimes you do have transactions for information. It does happen. So how do we explain it? Like what's going on when it happens? Well, the way that you get a price for information is you have to have flaws in the efficiency of the market. Okay, so but flaws in the efficiency and competitiveness of markets is what makes information priceable.
Hmm.
So, for example, in order to make a transaction between a buyer and a seller of information, basically both sides, the buyer and the seller, have to have some kind of like market power, some kind of monopoly, some kind of control over that
Yeah.
information. So, in other words,
Yep.
if I don't have exclusivity in the information, I can't sell it. And if
Yep.
you don't have some kind of exclusivity in the information, you're not going to buy it because wouldn't be able to monetize it if you did.
Yep.
So in other words, the price of information is like a function of the sort of the monopoly or the market power over the information on both the buyer and the seller side.
Hmm.
So these kinds of like flaws in the market efficiency are, like what are they? There's like different categories of them, right? So one is like, sort of state power, state intervention in the market.
Hmm.
Another is another is like secrecy. So in other words, the market is sort of
Hmm.
not efficiently causing the information to get
If the
allocated
information
to
doesn't get
everyone,
out, it's like held
right?
somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Another is IP,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? So and relatedly, just monopoly, just plain old monopoly. So in other words, if I've got a market cornered, like if I'm the only person who's allowed to sell cabbages, then like information on how to produce cabbages more efficiently, like I will buy it, even though
Yeah.
everybody can reverse engineer it because I'll profit from because I'm the only person that can sell cabbages.
Yeah.
So if you have like an upstream or a downstream monopoly, or if you have a monopoly somewhere else in the system, if you control some choke point in the system, you'll pay for information, even though you
Right.
can't control
Right.
it.
Which is like true of a huge percentage of the internet now
Yeah,
for a variety of reasons.
yeah, exactly. So what this means is so who invests in information? it's this, it's monopolists, states, people
Mhm.
who have like sort of some secrecy or some control over it.
Like Google was the first in some ways, right? Like they were genius in being like, we're going to just capture the world's knowledge for free and help you all with it.
Right, right. And it's like it's a very counterintuitive thing because we think what's going on in is like a market, but it's really not a market. I mean, the reason that information gets invested in is because the market isn't working, not because it is.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, but then this is like a little bit counterintuitive because, on the one, you can also think, well, but then doesn't, when you have like an efficient market, doesn't that actually like stimulate innovation, which is another kind of information good? Like if you want to create innovation, don't you have to actually have competition? Like OpenAI and Anthropic are like clearly competing and they're sort of spurring each other on, right? So how does that
Mhm.
like sort of fit with what I just said? Well, I mean, the answer is like if you think about what's going on in like startup ecosystem, basically the way that startups or venture investors or whatever, the way that they profit from innovation is that whatever innovation happens in the startups has to eventually get sort of grafted into some kind of monopoly power in order to pay off. So in other words, like if you invest in a startup and that doesn't have like IP or whatever, what you're betting on is you're betting that they will corner a market. You're betting that they will gain monopoly power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you're betting that they will get sort of merged into like a big tech
Right.
actor,
Acquired.
which
Yeah.
has which has market power. That's the only way that you get that, that it actually like makes sense to invest in innovation, like the way that,
Investing in innovation in knowledge, right? Like if it was innovation in hardware manufacturing or
even then, I
uh
mean, in innovation in hardware manufacturing is just something that the next hardware manufacturer can copy, right?
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, or like I was thinking about a human process still, as long as it's being recorded in some fashion, and then you could just retrain a lot of other people in the same process. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have to control a choke point or you just don't invest in information goods at all.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, and so like the way to think about what's going on, but that it is true that like, if you have a super, super pure monopoly, like literally a monopoly, then okay, then actually people rest on their laurels and they don't innovate, right? So what you need is you sort of need to have like minimum viable competition but like but still have as much monopoly power as possible. So like the way that I think about this is like you want sort of minimum viable competition, but maximum possible backstopping. So in other words, like to create a super accelerationist type of innovation economy, you want the investors of both Anthropic and OpenAI to basically have zero risk, right? Otherwise, you're not getting maximum resources being plowed into these things. You want there to be like zero risk, like everybody's going to win. The only thing that is being competed on is like, one of them is going to get 10x, and the other is going to get 1000x. So this keeps them like active. This keeps them competing. But you don't want there to be any actual, and you want there to be like as little, minimum viable competition. You don't want there to be like so many actors that some are going to totally lose or wipe out.
If you're an investor, yes.
If you're an investor or if you're like a state trying to engineer an economy that maximizes its technological acceleration.
Only the US state.
Well, this is the US. I'm talking about,
Okay, cool. Yeah,
I'm
yeah, okay.
talking,
You're talking to US think tanks. I know. So bear in mind, I spend most of my time thinking about the exact opposite scenario, i.e., how to exist in a world where what you're saying is true.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But this is, yeah. Um,
Yes, I got it.
so,
You're talking to conservative American think tanks, so this makes perfect sense. Got
well,
it.
no, 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 no. That's not, that
Ah, okay.
it's really not just that. Like, and that's not the
But
kind of
like
conservative
China, I think
American think tanks I'm talking about.
China and Canada would disagree with that because we
I'll
don't
get to
want.
China in a second. I'll get to China in a
Okay,
second.
cool. Okay, keep
But
on.
anyway, so the point is we've got these kind of non-market like inductors of information goods that are like
Yes.
causing the information good investment to happen,
Yep.
right? States, corporations with market power, secrecy, IP. Okay.
I like it.
Um, uh, all right. So, but what this basically points towards is like oligopoly,
Yes.
um, like managed oligopoly, right?
Yes.
And it's actually surprisingly similar, like how it works in the United States and how it works in China.
Yeah.
In the United States, you basically have an oligopoly of of tech tech giants with like political type power who essentially have power over the government and are like
Yeah.
checking the government and making sure the government doesn't deviate from their sort of accelerationist agenda too far, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I call that, managed government with accelerationist characteristics.
Hmm.
And then in China, you've got managed market with accelerationist characteristics. You've got
Hmm.
a government which is sort of formally, superior to the enterprises, but it's serving the same agenda. It's pointing in the same direction. Essentially, minimum
Yeah.
viable competition, maximum viable backstopping, so that you're just maximizing investment, plowing into the same sort of like brain dead accelerationist agenda, which actually has nothing to do with the public good intelligently
What?
considered.
I completely agree. Was this true before software or high tech?
Um, Sort of, yeah, sort of. I mean, it was true in like, Cold War race kind of dynamics as well.
Right. Russia, US,
Yeah,
similar kind of thing, but they were investing in hardware, but same thing. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Okay, but but this is like the problem. We end up in this sort of managed oligopoly thing, which is, totally unmoored from the public
The
good.
opposite of a market. Yes.
Yeah. And okay, but then if we like go back in time, a long time ago, governments decided to do this thing called IP, which is this really crazy sort of thing, and it actually did lead to a more distributed sort of set of like power centers in innovation economies and in sort of
Huh.
political economy,
Huh.
right? So this is a copy of uh, the original like Venetian patent law,
Cool.
which gave inventors patents in Venice in like the 1400s.
But I mean, I think that you're sort of repeating the IP lawyer's argument that IP resulted in more innovation. When I was in law school, I still I think believe the argument that actually there would have been a lot more creativity and innovation had we never had IP.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think that's sort of open ideology. I mean, like, not that there's like not some thread of truth in it or whatever, but it's more complicated than that.
I agree with that. I completely agree with. Yeah, and I think I'm oversimplifying in a way that where the reality is probably somewhere between those two, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like
Okay.
in certain cases and in certain kind of parts of the curve, like, the open, that's true. But if you look at like the broad arc of history, I actually think like it's really hard for me to conclude that the sort of multi-century project of IP didn't actually encourage innovation in pretty interesting ways.
Yeah, I guess like if I can split it up, copyright, I think it's way less. I think standing on the shoulders of giants is way more important.
Yeah,
Patent, you need to protect it because of like the degree of investment necessary. How much you need to protect it is a big question, and then in between you sort of have trademarks.
yeah. Well, so I'll break it into those in a second.
Sweet.
So, if we go back to like the origins of IP, it was this very radical idea. Like, just think about it for a second. It's actually sort of an extraordinary exertion of state power for like the Doge of Venice to say, if you invent a new thing, like
Hmm.
I will jail anyone who copies you. It's like a weirdly invasive kind of, it reaches into the private sphere with state power in like a quite a remarkable way. Say that if you invent something new, then like nobody else can do that. I will use the state power to make sure that nobody else does the thing that you figured out as like a reward to you for figuring. It's a crazy, like, it must have been mind blowing when it was first done, right? And then you've got like the first copyright laws in the sort of 1600s, 1700s. Okay. But so what's the sort of politics of this? What's like the politics of like early IP? It's kind of this like Renaissance Enlightenment era in which this is happening.
Hmm.
And there's a few things that I think are worth noticing about it. One, like, what were the governments trying to do when they did this? One, they were trying to prevent sort of appropriation of genius by the owners of capital.
A
So
nice way of putting it.
So in other words, the owners of the factories who could copy the inventor's idea, or the owners of the printing presses who could copy the author's work and like take all the value from it.
Is there a reason you chose genius, not invention for the first one?
Well, yeah, because that's the next thing. So that,
Okay.
in this sort of Renaissance and Enlightenment era, it was this idea of individual genius. It was very, the Renaissance man, the genius inventor. This was like, sort of part of the world model very strongly of people in that era. who were thinking about how where progress comes from and where culture comes from. They thought it came from individual genius, you know?
Hmm.
And so so these the shape of these rights kind of reflects it.
Hmm. Yeah, which yeah, it's an idea worth remembering.
Yeah. And then the other sort of assumption these things make is they assume that like what anything is that whatever like information good you're producing is good, couldn't possibly be bad. So in other words, every invention is good, every text is good.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're not saying like, oh well, we like we like the bicycle and we don't like
Don't like
the
nuclear weapons.
repeating rifle.
Right.
No, just like they both get patents.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's content neutrality, which is this other sort of very Enlightenment idea, right? Which kind of gets us to it dovetails with the
Sure.
First Amendment, liberal sort of,
Yeah, it's the current US definition of content neutrality, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I like
Um,
it.
okay, but let's look at the things in like a little bit more detail. Like so copyright, like what this is the first major copyright statute called the Statute of Anne from like early 1700s in England. And what does copyright protect? Copyright is protecting expression. So what they're trying to do really is what all these kind of IP rights are trying to do is they're trying to sort of find the like frictional point, the like difficult part of the bringing to bear of information goods and like reward it so people do more of it. So in other words, so it's rewarding not like the idea of like the plot of Hamlet or whatever, but the sort of hard work of putting it together, putting pen to paper, and writing
Mm,
it piece by piece. That's like the
right.
part of the process that the copyright statute chooses to protect.
And because you need some way of physically, this is pre-software. So
Yeah,
at this point, like you do need the cassette tape was what, in IP law I learned. You have to capture the music on a cassette tape and then send it to yourself because you need some proof of it
yeah,
having been invented.
yeah. Um, and okay, so that's copyright. Patent, same kind of thing, right? We're protecting the invention, not the idea. Like if you have an idea about a scientific principle that you can apply, not
Yeah.
patentable. You're
No.
patenting the actual work of like putting together the thing, committing it to an
Yes.
invention.
Yeah, it has to work. It can't just be the idea.
Yeah. So they're
You need
copying
to
that
know.
point of friction or that thing which at least, sort of a few hundred years ago appeared to be the point of friction, the thing that needed to be rewarded and encouraged in order to bring these things into being.
Yeah,
Trademark is another really interesting one. This is a bit of a can of worms or a digression, but I'll just say a word about it. Like
please.
the the uh, the basic idea of trademark is like an actor in trade invests in a good reputation. And so then they should get the reward of like being the only one that can
Yeah,
sell.
it's all reputational. Right.
Yeah. And one of the sort of theories of this is that like about why that should be protected is that trademark reduces consumer search costs. So in other
Mm.
words, like if you know that like this mark represents quality, then you sort of don't need to sift through the ocean
Yeah,
to like
I
find.
trust Claude more than the million open Claude laws agents.
Yeah,
Therefore, I'm going to go with Claude.
yeah, exactly. And no, but I think actually that this idea of search costs, I think the idea that trademarks reduce search costs is actually like quite a bit more dubious than it used to be. Like 100, 200 years ago, people, you had no source of information. You just had to sort of trust the label. Or now you have like so many sources of information, even compared to like 40 years ago. I think trademarks are actually doing a lot less work in sort of reducing consumer search costs than they once were. And in fact, trademarks are now very frequently used, I think, actually to deceive consumers and to increase consumer confusion, like in a totally, counterproductive way. So, for example, if you're like a private equity company, you buy a brand which has a good reputation. Now, what you can do is you can reduce the quality of the product and continue to sell it at a premium until people catch on and sort of pocket the difference until the market, figures out that you have like, sort of stripped
Baked it.
stripped the brand, right?
Mm.
And this happens all the time. So I actually think that like a lot of what's going on with trademark right now is sort of consumer confusion or sort of faking out consumers and like, creating like,
Yeah, Amazon seems like it's rife with it. Absolutely.
yeah. And so I think there's a, we're
That's one side. The other extreme, though, and this is, I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about like value going to zero or infinitely, is the value of extremely premium brands. Like, why is it that I pay so much for a bag that's made of the exact same materials as what I can get on Temu, but it's instead Dolce and Gabbana?
right, right. Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's like Veblen goods and status signaling, and I mean, there's a lot to say about all this kind of stuff. But uh, but basically, I mean, I think that I mean, I have a little bit of a pet idea that an interesting, better way of thinking about what trademark ought to be doing is
Yes.
that is it when the government protects a trademark, it's protecting sort of like a promise that the seller is making to the buyer. But that's not
Yep.
how it's conceived of at all. But we should think about it that way. But we don't.
Hmm.
Because so
Yeah.
for
It's perceived
example,
as protecting a brand.
it's perceived as it's just the property of the owner, whoever owns it. Like, so if you want to sell like garbage, under the Coke brand, if you own the Coke brand, then like you can do that. But I actually think that shouldn't be how it works. You should, the
Correct.
government, the state should actually like not protect this like sort of important semantic signifier in our culture,
Yeah.
unless you are like upholding what people think it represents.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Um, so okay, anyway, enough about trademark. Trade secret is another really important thing. Trade secret, there's a lot of power in trade secrets, and the fact that like companies can now sort of use AI to extract more information about like their own internal processes basically means that they're able to turn what used to be sort of hard to capture tacit internal company knowledge, that kind of thing. They're able to like codify that, put that into a model and make that into more of a trade secret. So I think that there's actually quite a big transfer of value going on right now from sort of labor and human capital to corporate trade secret capital. So there's another sort of question about re-examining like trade
Why
secret.
why is that happening now more?
Because, for example, if you've got like companies have like intangible sort of knowledge and things going on in their culture that like, you know, this department works with that department like in a certain kind of way, and that's why the product comes together well, and this people talk to the customers in a certain way, and like that's why the relationships
Huh.
with the customers go well. A lot of this is like tacit stuff that's just in the culture.
Huh.
But when you can sort of just like set an AI loose to like read everybody's emails and watch their processes, now you can just like figure out exactly what that is if you're the owner of the company, and you can just, put it in the bank instead of relying on the employees to kind of keep that
Okay,
tacit
which is
company
getting
knowledge.
to the Matt Gee Guild thing. Got
Yeah,
it. Keep
yeah.
going. Okay.
Okay. So what this means is that like we need to like reassess what we want IP to protect. And I don't think we just, I'm not ready to throw IP out the window because then we just get into this oligopoly thing. Um, but we do need to rethink what we want IP to protect. So and like in the IP era, what is that? Like, I don't know. Maybe in journalism, it's not the sort of committing of the thing down into the text of the article. Maybe it's like the fact that the journalist uncovers about public corruption. So maybe that's actually what we want to like reward rather than the sort of committing down of the article. In artistic processes, I don't know, maybe we want to reward something more like artistic merit than just like, the sort of uh, you know, committing of some original expression or something. Um, Maybe we want to reward something more like cultural vitality. Maybe what we want IP to protect it has some more to do with like cultural vitality than with some sort of economic value thing.
Yeah, how we define these is going to be like the discovery in journalism. I can sort of appreciate the definition of artistic merit or cultural vitality. Like,
Touche, touche.
hard.
Exactly. And similarly, like with inventions, maybe we actually want to make this evaluation that a market can't make about, is this invention a positive social value or is it a negative social value? If it's a negative social value, why is the state rewarding it? Why is the state protecting it with this, extraordinary use of public power to, grant an IP right to it, right? I mean, if we think that like, Facebook without a negative public value, well, why are we protecting its copyrights and its IP? It just doesn't make sense. But as you say, like it, how do you make that determination? It's not the kind of determination a market can make. It's a political determination. It's a values-based sort of political determination.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in other words, like what I think what all this stuff is pushing us towards is it's pushing us away from that kind of like content neutral mode of thinking
Yeah,
about
where
what
it's like
IP is
something that
doing.
has to be hard and concrete and
Right.
neutral, and instead now is value is big is defined by values.
Exactly. So it's pushing us
Yeah,
out of that sort of liberal enlightenment mode of thinking about what IP ought
yeah,
to be
even
doing
of
and
a
pushing
meritocracy. Now it's more political, to your point. Yeah,
more
I
it's
like
more
that.
political. So there's this kind of illiberal notion of IP that sort of naturally just presents itself in this moment, I think.
Yeah,
And and so like and we can if we revisit the original ideas about IP, it's like, do we still care about these things? So, preventing appropriation of genius by owners of capital. Yeah, actually that one, yes. I think we still care about that, right? We still
yeah,
we still want
yeah,
that.
definitely.
But we have to
We
like
want it.
revisit the idea that it's individual genius that is producing what we want. I mean, it's not, right? Inventors are standing on the shoulders of others and
Huge academic institutions, mass amounts of government or private sector
exactly.
dollars, etc.
Exactly, right? So, we just can't like pull from these 18th century assumptions necessarily anymore. Similarly, like,
An interesting one for that, that if you want examples, pharma and how like the patent cliff, if you followed, like, so just despite AI and despite the COVID miracle, we have not really been able to use tech to figure out new drugs for over
right,
15 years now.
right. Yeah. And there's another question I think about like, if you can, if a company that, fires up an AI data center the size of Denmark and starts spitting out new inventions, like, do we actually want them to have the same kind of patent protection that like we were giving to individual inventors for all those?
Great.
I don't think so,
I
right?
agree.
You
I
know,
completely agree.
and then similarly is this question about, do we want to like make sort of more prudential evaluations about whether an invention is like good for society and reward those? Or anyway,
Huh. Cool.
um, so I think this point just points towards a completely new politics of information goods, which dovetails with just a new politics like in general. It's like a fairly big question because if we go away from the sort of mechanistic grant of IP rules, then it starts to we need to start thinking about sort of grants of IP as like grants of political privilege of a certain kind, right?
Hmm.
And then similarly, like if we want to go away from individual grants to sort of individuals, then we need to start to think about the sort of associational or social shape of the forms from which the information goods that we want emerge. And I actually think that this model of sort of thinking about associational information rights is a good way of kind of finding the middle path between this sort of mechanistic liberal thing and this more sort of illiberal grant of privilege paradigm for IP. Because it and uh, here's the way to think about it. If we create sort of new classes of informational rights, but we don't give these informational rights are designed to protect individuals. But if we say that they're not exercisable by individuals, they're only exercisable at the sort of associational level, right? Then we actually what we can do is we can create a way in which the state can sort of take a neutral, a more or less neutralist view of what kinds of new information rights that it wants to create. But the exertion of these rights or the expression of these new rights that the state creates are going to happen at the level of large associations of people, which means that they're going to reflect these broader sets of values that are shared between large groups of people instead of just the sort of, uh, financial interests of corporations or individuals. So like the kind of thing that I'm gesturing towards in the Data Freedom Act or other kinds um, of grants of associational information rights. What this would look like is, for example, a large tech company, in order to use information that it gleans or that is conveyed to it by users, it wouldn't, it actually can't just do that on the basis of the user clicked a box. It has to negotiate for the right to use that information with an association with like a legally sanctioned association representing a whole class of users. So users join these larger associations, which I call digital rights organizations, and Google or Meta or Anthropic or whatever has to negotiate with digital rights associations in order to be able to use the information that it gleans from their members. This is quite a radical sort of legal move, but it's not complicated technically. It's just sort of a different way of thinking about what the law is requiring of of large of large platforms who want to use information in the same way that the original patent laws or copyright laws were in sort of an extraordinary way, telling
Hmm.
owners of printing presses or owners of factories that they had to secure the rights to what they wanted to print or what they wanted to produce from individual inventors, right? Now you're just sort of saying to platforms or the AI companies or whatever, they need to secure the rights to do their thing from large associations.
Hmm.
Um, so that's that.